There's a particular kind of person you might know. They're not on Instagram. They don't update their status. When you look them up online, you find almost nothing. And in a world where visibility often feels like currency, their absence is noticeable. But here's what most people miss. This isn't about being antisocial or technophobic. Research in behavioral psychology suggests that people who choose to live primarily offline often operate from a fundamentally different psychological framework than those who are constantly connected. And understanding that framework reveals something fascinating about how human attention, identity, and contentment actually work. Let's start with something psychologists call the locus of validation. For most people online, validation is external. It comes from likes, comments, shares, the visible approval of others. But for people who live offline, validation tends to be internal. They've built what researchers describe as a stable self-concept, meaning their sense of worth isn't contingent on external feedback loops. This isn't about confidence in the traditional sense. It's more like indifference to the metrics that govern social media behavior. Studies on self-determination theory show that when people derive satisfaction from autonomous goals they set for themselves rather than goals imposed by social expectations, they report higher levels of psychological well-being. People who live offline often fall into this category. They're not rejecting connection, they're rejecting the performance of connection. And that distinction matters because it changes how they experience time. Think about how you use your phone. Most people check it between 50 and 100 times per day. Each check fragments attention. Each notification pulls you out of whatever you were doing. Psychologists call this context switching, and research shows it can take anywhere from several minutes to over 20 minutes to fully return to a state of deep focus after an interruption. People who live offline aren't experiencing those interruptions. Their attention isn't being pulled in 50 different directions throughout the day. This creates what some researchers describe as cognitive continuity, the ability to sustain focus on a single task or thought without external disruption. And that continuity shapes how they think, how they work, and how they relate to the world around them. But there's something deeper happening here, something that has to do with identity formation. Social media platforms are designed around the concept of self-curation. You present a version of yourself, and that version is constantly being evaluated, compared, and measured against others. Over time, many people begin to experience what psychologists call identity foreclosure, where the curated version starts to feel more real than the private self. For people who live offline, identity development tends to follow a different path. Without the constant feedback loop of social media, they're forced to answer questions about who they are in the absence of an audience. This can be uncomfortable. It removes the external scaffolding that many people use to construct their sense of self. But it also creates space for what developmental psychologists call identity exploration, the process of figuring out who you are through lived experience rather than social performance. There's also the issue of social comparison. Research dating back to the 1950s shows that humans have a natural tendency to evaluate themselves relative to others. Social media amplifies this tendency exponentially. You're not just comparing yourself to your immediate social circle. You're comparing yourself to millions of people, most of whom are presenting idealized versions of their lives. People who live offline still engage in social comparison, but the scope is different. They're comparing themselves to people they actually know, in context they can verify. This doesn't eliminate comparison anxiety entirely, but it does make it more manageable. The psychological distance between you and someone you see in person is much smaller than the distance between you and an influencer with 1 million followers. And then there's the question of boredom. Boredom has become almost taboo in modern culture. Most people reach for their phones the moment they feel understimulated, but boredom serves a psychological function. Research in cognitive neuroscience suggests that boredom activates the default mode network in the brain, the system responsible for introspection, memory consolidation, and creative thinking. People who live offline experience more boredom, but they also experience more of what follows boredom: reflection, daydreaming, the kind of unstructured mental wandering that often leads to insight. They're not escaping discomfort through constant stimulation, they're sitting with it. And over time, that changes their relationship to their own thoughts. But here's where it gets more complex. Living offline isn't inherently better or worse than living online. It's a trade-off. People who live offline miss out on certain forms of connection. They're not part of online communities that bring together people with niche interests. They're not exposed to the same diversity of perspectives. They're not participating in conversations that only happen in digital spaces. And for some people, particularly those who are geographically isolated or who belong to marginalized groups, online connection can be life-changing. The assumption that offline life is always richer or more authentic doesn't account for people whose offline worlds are limited or hostile. What seems to matter more than being online or offline is the degree of intentionality. Research on media psychology suggests that people who use technology intentionally, who decide when and how to engage rather than responding to notifications and impulses, tend to have better mental health outcomes than people who either avoid technology entirely or use it reactively. People who live offline have usually made an intentional choice. They've thought about what they're gaining and what they're giving up. They've decided that the trade-offs are worth it, and that decision reflects something about their values, their priorities, and their tolerance for certain kinds of discomfort. There's also something to be said about presence. Psychologists who study mindfulness and attention have found that the ability to be fully present, to inhabit a single moment without constantly anticipating the next one, is associated with higher life satisfaction. People who live offline tend to score higher on measures of present moment awareness. They're not mentally composing posts while they're having experiences, they're just having the experiences. This doesn't mean they remember more or that their experiences are objectively better. But it does mean they're less likely to experience what researchers call experience-taking distance, the phenomenon where documenting an experience pulls you out of the experience itself. Think about the last time you went somewhere beautiful. Did you spend time trying to capture the perfect photo? Did you think about how you'd describe it online? For many people, those impulses are automatic. For people who live offline, they're not. The experience remains private, unmediated, and in some sense, more fully theirs. But there's a loneliness to it too. When you don't participate in the shared reality of social media, you're not part of certain conversations. You don't know what everyone is talking about. You miss references, trends, the ambient cultural knowledge that circulates online. And for some people, that disconnection feels like a form of exile. The question isn't whether living offline makes you happier. Research suggests the relationship between social media use and well-being is complex and highly individual. Some people thrive online, others find it draining. What matters is alignment, whether the way you're living matches the kind of person you're trying to be. People who live offline have often reached a point where the misalignment became too painful. They realized that the person they were online didn't match the person they felt like inside. Or they noticed that their attention had become so fragmented that they could barely finish a book. Or they felt a growing sense of emptiness that no amount of engagement seemed to fill. And so they left. Not dramatically, not as a statement, but quietly, gradually, as a kind of experiment. They wanted to see what would happen if they stopped performing their lives and just lived them. And for many of them, what happened was a kind of recalibration. Their sense of time slowed down. Their thoughts became less reactive. They started to notice things they'd been too distracted to see. This doesn't mean you have to delete your accounts or throw your phone in a river, but it might be worth asking yourself, when was the last time you were truly bored? When was the last time you sat with an uncomfortable thought instead of scrolling past it? When was the last time you did something without documenting it? The people who live offline aren't necessarily wiser or more enlightened. They've just made a different set of compromises. They've traded visibility for privacy, constant connection for occasional solitude, the performance of life for the experience of it. And for them, that trade feels worth it. Maybe you try something small. Not as a rule, just as an experiment. Take one day a week where you don't post anything. Or delete one app and see what happens to the time you suddenly have. Not because online life is bad, but because offline life might have something you've been missing.